Hello everyone and welcome back to the newly rebranded Homo Complexus, or as I used to be called, I'll probably still call myself this, Richard Likes History. I can't decide which one I like better yet. Yeah, Homo Complexus is a bit more original, but yeah, Richard Likes History, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to return today to where we started the last episode again. As is the style with this podcast, I don't want it to be something that you have to listen to back. This is a standalone episode, so I'll be going through everything necessary for you to understand this. So don't worry if you haven't watched the last one. But I'm going to be starting where we started the last episode as well, which is on the Malabar coast in India. It's the western coast of India. And the reason why I want to start there is because it is one of the oldest trading maritime areas in the world. There has been sea trade across the Arabian Sea here, from the Malabar coast to places that are now modern day Oman, into the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, for a staggering amount of time. Historians estimate that it is, what have I written here, around 3000 to 2600 BCE when this started. So that's more than 4,500, 5,000 years ago. That is staggering to me. It's called the Bronze Age. And so why was this trade happening? Who was trading? It was the Indus Valley civilization, something that very few people outside of the subcontinent, and it's in modern day Pakistan, have heard of. And they were trading with, we think, a people called, what's been termed now the Magan civilization of Oman. So we had this civilization based around the Indus River Delta, which is in modern day Pakistan, trading with people from Oman. And the reason that they know this is because somehow they're able to figure this out. I don't know exactly how, but there's lots of copper that they found in major Indus Valley cities. Places that are called very strange names, Harappa or Mohenjo-daro, I know, is one of the archaeological sites. And the copper that they find there, they can actually tell that it has come from a place in Oman called the Hajar Mountains. 5,000 years ago, this sea trade was happening. And what did we say grew on the Malabar coast? Some very nice things for trade. Things like pepper, cardamom, coconuts, and perhaps most importantly of all, or most highly sought after of all, indigo. Indigo, the plant that gives us a distinct blue, deep blue color. And the word indigo, I'm going to go on a linguistics tangent again. The word indigo comes from the Greek word indikon, which means from India. So the word that we use for blue is the Greek word for from India. That's great. And indigo was known as the blue gold of the Malabar coast. And if we fast forward a little bit, this indigo is still highly sought after. A little bit later, a trading people from the Mediterranean, the Phoenicians, figured out how to get an extraordinary purplish blue dye from a completely different source, not a plant, but something called a Murex sea snail, a particular species called apparently Bolinus brandaris. And I want you to remember that this snail has a sister species called Hexaples trunculus. The species name is not important, but it's got a sister snail, this Phoenician snail, that produces a purple-blue shaded dye as well. And this sister snail will be very important for the second half of our story. Because when the sister snail's purple-blue dye is exposed to direct sunlight, the color of this dye changes to a pure, startling sky blue, the same sky blue color that is on the Israeli flag today. Really beautiful color, actually. And this color referred to when it is used to dye cloth in Jewish tradition and Jewish law as Tekhelet, I think, Tekhelet is the sacred blue thread that is used in ancient Jewish ritual garments. And yeah, as I said, it's the predecessor of the modern Israeli flag and the blue Star of David that we see in the news so often now. Something interesting happens. Remember, so we have, I'm going to go with the tangent of this story. There's blue from the Malabar coast, which you can get from a plant, and there's blue from the Mediterranean, which you can get from a snail, okay? And obviously the Israelites, the predecessors of Jews, are nearer to the Mediterranean. They're probably going to use the snail. However, by the 7th century, in the Common Era, following the collapse of the Roman Empire that we went through in episode 1, but again, you don't have to go listen back if you haven't, there was the Arab conquest of the Levant. Remember, Muhammad was around in the 600s in the Common Era. And somehow the knowledge of which sea snail, particular sea snail or sea creature, produced the sacred blue dye and the method to extract it, and perhaps the trick to let it sit out in the sun to turn blue, was lost. The knowledge was lost. And this was a great tragedy for Jews worldwide. I never knew this. If you're strictly an Orthodox Jew, this was really a big problem for you, apparently, because I'm going to quote the Bible here. I never thought I would do that on this podcast, but the Bible is essentially just a big, long historical document, one of the best known ones. So I'm sure I'll quote from it a lot more. I'm going to quote from Numbers 15, verse 38, which goes as follows. Speak unto the children of Israel, and bid that they make themselves fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generations, and that they put upon the fringe of their borders a ribbon of blue. Come back to this Tekhelet again. So it's written in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, in the Christian tradition, that in order to worship properly, you need some blue in the cloth that you have. And there's a bit of a problem if you can't figure out how to make this blue cloth anymore. But wait, you might say, why don't they just get it from India? Well, we'll get to that. This is such a contentious issue and means so much to the Jewish people that in 1897, during the first Zionist Congress, apparently, a prominent businessman named David Wolfsohn, sounding very German here, writes this, apparently. We already have a flag, and it is blue and white. The tallit, with which we wrap ourselves when we pray, that is our symbol. Let us take this tallit from its bag and unwind it before the eyes of Israel and the eyes of all nations. So this blue color, and that was produced by this snail, is so significant to Jews worldwide and to these early Zionists that it produced the Israeli flag. Now, again, we haven't answered the question of why they didn't just use the blue dye from India, from the Malabar coast. Here we get into the weeds. So apparently in the Talmud, I'm not going to pronounce this right probably, but the Bava Metzvah 61b, I looked this up. It says this: I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. I am he who distinguished in Egypt between the drop of a firstborn and a non-firstborn. I am also he who will exact punishment from one who attaches kala ilan, which is apparently the word for indigo, to his garment and claims it is real Tekhelet. So, man, this is a super ominous message from, if God really said this, man, scary God. So the whole Egypt firstborn and non-firstborn thing. If you've watched the Disney movie The Prince of Egypt, or you were told Bible stories as a child, like I was, you'll know about the 10 plagues that the Hebrew God, under Moses' direction, inflicts upon Pharaoh and the Egyptians. The 10th one, the worst plague, that God inflicts is he kills the firstborn sons of the Egyptians, which, is a bit kind of unpardonable sin today, but whatever. I'm not a big fan of this God personally. And what it says here in the Talmud is, as far as I can see, and I had a little read about this, that this distinguishing between the drop of a firstborn and a non-firstborn is apparently God saying that even if who you think your firstborn is actually not your firstborn, or perhaps, so say like they're a man and woman have a child out of wedlock, and that is actually that man's first child, but then the child goes to live in another family or something, and the father in the other family is not the dad. Some weird stuff like that can happen, where the one who the parents, or at least one of the parents, thinks is the firstborn child isn't actually. And God's going to kill the one genetically that is the firstborn child. Okay, so even if they think it's the middle child or some I probably confused you all here, but he knows apparently who the firstborn child is. And the same way, he knows whether you've used indigo or the correct blue dye from this sea snail. So, well, make of that what you will. But people were concerned about this, right? This mattered to people. And the critical link between this Murex snail, Hexaplex trunculus, and how to get the dye from it, remember they had lost this ability with the Arab conquest in the 7th century in the Common Era. A Jewish or an Israeli chemist by the name of Otto Elsner, apparently in the 1980s, just by accident, had some of this Murex snail dye lying around in a pot or a dish or something, and in his lab, and some sunlight, he left the window open, I think as the story goes, and some sunlight shines on the dye and it turns this amazing sky blue color. And voila, they had rediscovered how to make the dye from this snail. And yeah, as someone who isn't Jewish, I had never heard of this, but apparently this was a big deal. And now that we've sort of cracked the code of indigo and this Jewish blue dye in the snail, sorry, this is a bit of a tangential episode, but you can just skip it if you're bored. We're going to go to, because we mentioned Pharaoh and the Israelites and Moses, I found out something really interesting about that. So Moses is said to encounter the burning bush, or the Hebrew God, for the first time in around 1300 before the Common Era is what we believe happened, or what historians have sort of dated it to. Now, where does this Hebrew God called Yahweh actually come from? So Moses sees the burning bush, the bush speaks to him, but where did this happen? This is meant to have happened in the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. So we're back in Egypt. And there is a monastery there now. It's a place called Mount Sinai. And the monastery is called St. Catherine's Monastery. And there is a bush there that is apparently the descendant of, it's apparently a rare shrub that only appears in that particular habitat in the Sinai Peninsula. And you can still go visit, the descendant of this burning bush, supposedly, today. That would be pretty cool, actually, to go there. It's in the middle of a very inhospitable desert, the Sinai Peninsula, and there's this beautiful monastery at the foot of a mountain that is mentioned in the Bible. Now, the earliest mentions of this god, Yahweh, who, remember, is the god of the monotheistic Abrahamic religions, right? Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Apparently there are many more, but I'm not a smart enough religious scholar to be able to tell you that. But at least the main three. This is the progenitor god, right? The big one that billions and billions of people worship today. Where did he come from? Outside of the Bible, the first mentions of this are in around the 13th and 14th centuries BCE. So that sort of lines up with the burning bush thing. In Deuteronomy 33 verse 2, it says this: "The Lord came from Sinai, and he dawned over them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran. He came with myriads of holy ones from the south, from his mountain slopes. And in Judges 5 verse 4, it says something similar. When you, Lord, went out from Seir, when you marched from the land of Edom. Now, the interesting thing about these repeated mentions of the Lord coming from Sinai, coming from the south, this is not the traditional homelands of the Israelites, who are believed to be a branch of the Canaanite peoples, who are the ancient sort of Bronze Age peoples who inhabited what is modern day, Palestine and Israel. And of course, a lot of us will know from the Prince of Egypt, or if we were brought up in a Christian home, that the Israelites are supposedly were under Pharaoh or under slavery in one of Pharaoh Ramesses' time, and they were away from their homeland. And Moses, the story goes that Moses' mother pushes him into a basket onto the Nile River, so that the Egyptians don't kill him. Apparently they're killing a bunch of firstborn kids for some reason. Kind of like God does later to them. And Moses' little baby is in the basket on the Nile, and who fishes him out of the water but the royal family of Egypt, apparently, and he grows up in the royal household. So the story goes. And then later on, for some reason, he's disenchanted or unhappy, and he goes into exile. And there he meets a people called the Midianites. He meets his future wife called Zipporah. This is all in the Prince of Egypt, and I thought it was a bunch of nonsense, but this is apparently sort of how the tradition actually goes. Yeah, he marries this Midianite woman, Zipporah, whose father, Jethro, is a priest. Famously, in the Disney adaptation of Prince of Egypt, there you go, Jethro, high priest of Midian. And this is apparently all sort of in line with the traditional account. And it is when Moses is with these Midianites in exile in the desert, away from Egypt, away from Canaan, that he meets Yahweh. Now so the people, the monks at St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai will say the burning bush was there. Other people will think that it's closer to the northwestern corner of the Arabian Peninsula. Obviously, no one is sure exactly where the encounter happened, dubious as it is to my ears anyway. But it wasn't in Israel and it wasn't in Canaan, okay? And the thing is, the Canaanites already had their own gods. They had a perfectly good pantheon of gods. There was the big patriarchal god, El, and his female counterpart, Asherah. There was the storm god, Baal. I knew about that one. I remembered that one from a child. So who is this Yahweh? Does he just appear from, the desert in Egypt, in Sinai, or in Arabia maybe, or just south of the Dead Sea, and then comes to replace the Canaanite idolatrous gods? This is obviously a matter of big debate, but again, it's sort of documented in the Bible that this Yahweh figure that speaks through Moses in the burning bush comes and replaces El and Asherah and is now the new god of the Israelites. However, El, that name still sticks around because we have names like Daniel, Samuel, Israel, all of this still carrying that El in the name. And later names of the kings of Judah and stuff, and if you go through the Old Testament chapters in the Bible, books in the Bible, they will add sort of a different suffix at the end, which is Yah, Isaiah, what are the other, Hezekiah. I'm not smart enough to list them all now, but you get the idea. The names sort of start shifting. Now, interestingly, we know for a fact from archaeological, digs in places like Ugarit, which is in Syria nowadays, that the god El and Asherah were definitely worshipped together by the Canaanites before this Yahweh thing came. And I won't bore you with the details of it. But yeah, there is a big shift that happens. And it happens apparently in the 7th to 6th centuries before the Common Era. So that's a long time after that's like 600 years after Moses supposedly has the encounter with Yahweh. There are still people in, what will become Israel and Palestine who worship these Canaanite gods. And it's actually only during the reigns of the Judean kings, the same names we said before, Hezekiah and Josiah, that they say, listen, we got to stop worshipping these Canaanite gods, especially Baal and Asherah. Because, apparently the story goes, since Israel was doing pretty badly militarily against people like the Assyrians and the Babylonians from Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq, they clearly thought that, some of the chakras were unaligned and they needed to adjust their religion, to get better prospects here. And by this point, remember El was the old Canaanite patriarch god, and we had Asherah, the wife, and Baal, the storm god. By this point, El and Yahweh have sort of merged into one. So Moses, or whoever, had the idea to bring Yahweh from these non-Canaanite peoples, from maybe Arabia, maybe the Sinai, who knows, have brought a foreign god to Canaan, and they've sort of co-opted this into their big patriarch god, El, and now they want to get rid of all the rest and be monotheistic. And there's a passage in 2 Kings, the book of 2 Kings, where this is quite explicit. It goes, it's 23 verse 4. The king ordered Hilkiah, the high priest, the priests next in rank, and the doorkeepers to remove from the temple of the Lord all the articles made for Baal and Asherah, and all the starry hosts. He burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron Valley, and took the ashes to Bethel. So that's pretty explicit. They've gone and burnt all the other gods except El and Yahweh, this fusion. So I never knew this, that the God that is worshipped by Christians, Jews, and Muslims around the world is, this strange, looks like anyway from a secular perspective, this strange fusion of El and Yahweh, a god from the Sinai, or maybe even the Hijaz, which is the area like near Mecca, Medina, a bit north of there probably, but that entire coastline of Arabia is called the Hijaz. So maybe it's even like an Arabian god merged with the Canaanite god El. And what a weird thing that we all sort of get so obsessed about today. So there is actually, I forgot to mention this before, there is actually no direct archaeological or historical evidence that a figure named, Moses ever actually existed outside of the biblical sources, let alone lived as a prince or an Egyptian royal. And there is, however, the fact that Moses, the name, is an Egyptian name. And a lot of the descriptions given in the Moses story do match, what's known about what's called Egypt's New Kingdom period, approximately, I think. 1550 to 1070 BCE. It would have been around when the Israelites were the slaves of the Egyptian pharaohs. Now Moses, as I said, it's an Egyptian name, and it comes from the Egyptian root mes or mos, meaning born of or child. And funnily enough, it's the exact same suffix found in the names of the very famous pharaohs, Thutmose, which is born of Tut or Thoth, or Ramesses, born of Ra. So in the Prince of Egypt movie anyway, Moses and Ramesses are sort of wards or brothers, and their names mean very similar things. Moses is just son of, whom? He's missing the his name is missing who he's the son of. He's just son of Moses. And Ramesses, that ending is the same as Moses' name. Now, interestingly, while we don't know, for sure from any records other than the biblical ones that Moses even existed or was a ward of the royal family, the Egyptians did do this sort of thing. We know that. So it was a standard practice for pharaohs to take children from foreign subjects, local chieftains, conquered vassals, and raise them in the royal court. It's a system called the cup system, apparently. And it is noteworthy that the biblical story has something like this. Make of that what you will. You can draw your own conclusions there. That's where I'm going to leave it there. This was a bit of a rambling one, and maybe it didn't make much sense to anyone, but it was interesting to me at least. So I'll see you on the next one, and stay curious.